Verstappen dominated the final race of 2022 as Charles Leclerc beat Sergio Perez to P2 in the Drivers' Championship. Coming up on the Grand Prix-Cap today, Verstappen's win is a snapshot of a dominant season. I pick my 3 favourite Sebastian Vettel memories. And there's the usual race and driver ratings. So it's mics on and away we go! Well, hello and welcome everyone to the final time in 2022 to the Grand Prix-Cap. This is the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix-Cap, but it wasn't really, for me at least, the most thrilling of finales. Well, if anything, last year was setting the standard very, very high, but we've become accustomed actually to dull races around Abu Dhabi, and even with the track changes, it hasn't quite worked in the way we might have hoped. We had obviously some interesting battles through the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship, but it was a little bit all spread out, really, wasn't it? For me, I felt everything was a bit too far away from each other. Obviously you had Checo trying to come back at Leclerc, and that was sort of close in the closing stages. But there was no, because of the way the DRS zones work in that circuit, I feel like it was, if Perez had got into range, it would have been almost done and dusted, because you just wait for the second DRS zone and make sure you get a really good exit from the chicane. So the jeopardy is never really there. And, cars that are fairly closely matched, either, they just drive past each other and wait for the second DRS zone, like I said, or they find it incredibly difficult to get past each other. And the spectacle probably wasn't helped by the fact that Verstappen and Red Bull had the race so much under control. And really, I feel it's a snapshot of the season. It was 2022 in 58 laps, wasn't it, really? Because Verstappen and Red Bull were just so dominant again after being, off the pace in Sao Paulo. But we shouldn't see that as a negative. Regardless of which team or driver you support or is your favourite. And look, I don't count myself as a Max Verstappen fan, and I certainly don't count myself as a Red Bull fan. But they were excellent again, and they have done the best job. We cannot deny that. You have to admire the execution of what they've done. Adrian Newey has designed a fantastic car. And Adrian's a guy I've got a lot of respect for. He always conducts himself with good grace. Sometimes other members of Red Bull can leave that to be desired. It was just an excellent drive. It was a drive of a driver and team fully confident in their capabilities, fully confident in their car. They delivered. Max Verstappen delivered an excellent drive. He had this race completely in his pocket, because at no point really was he pushed into having to deliver more pace. The only problem in his way was tyre management. And once it became clear that Leclerc was on a one-stop as well, all Max had to do was cover Leclerc's pace, and he had that little extra in hand at all times. So even when Leclerc could bang in a high 29, Verstappen could bang in a mid-29, even while Perez was in the low 29s and edging towards the 28s on fresher tyres. And Red Bull, they went bold with that strategy for Checo, didn't they? I felt like they were trying to corner Leclerc, but it didn't quite work. Verstappen was a little bit too quick. It allowed Leclerc to just pace himself, ironically. But nonetheless, an excellent drive. And it really, as I said, is a snapshot of the season. Verstappen just had too much in that Red Bull for anybody else. Leclerc looked like it could challenge, but ultimately it faded away. And this was on a day where Ferrari actually got the strategy correct, because had they gone for a two-stop, they would have never caught Perez. And in the end, the one-stop got them track position, and they just about held on with an excellent drive from the Monegasque. And to be fair, Carlos Sainz had some good pace, but once he got held up behind the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton early on, then he was kind of out of the picture. And even with a late sprint to the finish, he was never going to catch Leclerc or Perez. So it begs the question again. We know the reasons why Abu Dhabi is the season finale, but why isn't Interlagos the finale? It gives us such a great send-off. The crowd is up for it. The racing is usually brilliant there. Whereas you go to Abu Dhabi and it's all so wide open. And it all feels a little bit soulless because there's no atmosphere. And they do their bit with the big fireworks and everything. And the fact that it's a twilight to darkness race. I don't think even that really goes in its favour. But, the money talks in sport. And it will always be the finale until they decide they don't want to be. So, of course, yesterday was Sebastian Vettel's final race in Formula One. He retired on a high with a point for Aston Martin. Not enough to get them P6 in the Constructors. But his drives towards the end of the season were absolutely fantastic, weren't they? That stirring drive in Kota, where he came through the field, put in some excellent overtakes. And I think he scored points in pretty much most of the last few races. So, he just seemed liberated by the fact that he was leaving and wanted to finish on a high. Now, I'm going to choose my top 3 Sebastian Vettel moments. I haven't always been a Sebastian Vettel fan. I thought he was, similarly to Max Verstappen, put too much on a pedestal at Red Bull. And Ferrari, well, they mismanaged him. And, of course, he was a direct competitor to Lewis Hamilton, who is my man. But it's only fair that I pick 3 special moments from Seb's career that I feel really show who he is and who he was as a racing driver. So my first one and my top choice is Monza 2008, where he won for Toro Rosso in the pouring rain. He took pole position that weekend as well. It was a sliding doors moment because all of a sudden he was there. He was one of the front runners. He'd been performing well in that season, but he hadn't really scaled those heights. It hadn't been a stand-up drive until that moment. And all of a sudden, it was the highest of highs because he was on pole position. His teammate Sebastian Bourdais was actually P4 on the grid on that day, and people forget that, sadly, because he actually stalled on the grid for the formation lap, so he never actually took the start from 4th. I mean, what could have been on that day for Toro Rosso? And even as the race got underway, the McLaren of Heikki Kovalainen in 2nd was the favourite to win the race because the McLaren was pretty good in the wet that year. Lewis Hamilton had shown as much at Silverstone. And yet Vettel just disappeared into the distance. Hamilton started 15th and had a small opportunity to actually win that race, but the track dried up, so he had to switch to, I think it may have been Inters or maybe even Slicks. I cannot remember off the top of my head right now. But still, Vettel did a brilliant job. There was no errors. He was never really under pressure. It was a foreshadowing moment for the future. Once he got in front, it was very difficult to catch him. He just seemed to disappear. But it was a special moment because that team was Minardi. It is now AlphaTauri. And Minardi had been these perennial backmarkers who, every so often would steal a point or two in some crazy races. You think back to the Nürburgring in 99, where they could have actually had a double points finish as Minardi with Marc Genet and Luca Badoer. But for that group of people to get their moment was just fantastic on that day, and Seb delivered it. And that really, it really catapulted him into F1 stardom. He'd already got the Red Bull drive, so more was to come, but it really put him in the picture as a future top-line F1 driver. And my second top Sebastian Vettel moment is his pole position in China in 2009. Again, he went on to win a wet race on the Sunday, but the pole was actually done in dry conditions. And this was all the more impressive because he only had one run in each session because Red Bull were managing a car issue. I think it might have been something to do with the transmission or the differential. I can't quite remember looking back now. But it just spoke volumes about the guy's ability to go out and produce. You think about the great pole winners, Hamilton, Senna, Mika Hakkinen at times. They were just able to go out, last few seconds of qualifying, and bam, there was the pole position lap. You hear Martin Brundle talk about it all the time. They saw Senna coming up behind them in the bright yellow helmet in the McLaren, and they knew that was the lap of the weekend. That's the one that everyone was tuning in for, and they all just jumped out of the way to make sure they didn't ruin it. And it was kind of kind of similar with Vettel, because he was able to just go out and do the lap. Okay, the situation in terms of the way qualifying was structured was very, very different, but you still had to go out and do the lap, and that will never, ever change in motorsport. If you want to qualify at the front, you have to deliver the perfect lap, or the near perfect lap, to get it. And of course, he went on to win a soaking wet Chinese Grand Prix on the Sunday, did Seb, and it was an excellent drive as well. And my final top Sebastian Vettel moment, this one took a little bit more thinking about, because I could have chosen some of his victories, and this was eventually one of his victories, but it's a moment that I think has been it's always been memed, but in a really good way. It's where he takes the lead at Spa, Belgium 2018, and he just breezes past Lewis Hamilton. And okay, he had a massive slipstream, but they were 4 wide with the Force Indias, or Racing Points as I think they were then. And the commentary from David Croft, I mean, I'm not a big Crofty fan, but the here comes Sebastian Vettel, that was his career. He just arrived and bam, there he was at the front, and he was an excellent driver, and he went on to win that race. And there are so many Sebastian Vettel moments, and people who are bigger fans than I am of Seb's career will have different moments, they'll remember different things, but they're 3 that stand out for me. Seb's a 4-time world champion, he's had an amazing career, and he's got 53 Grand Prix victories. There's only a handful of other drivers who have ever achieved that. I think it's Seb, Lewis, Alain Prost and Michael Schumacher who have achieved that. So, he's in very special company. He's one of the most successful drivers in the sport's history. And the fact that he's used his platform in the last couple of years, even though he wasn't winning, to champion causes that he feels passionate about and raise social issues within the different countries where we've been visiting, speaks volumes about how he's grown as a person. Because if you'd said to me midway through his dominant period with Red Bull that he would be the sort of person to go out and do that, I'd have gone, okay, yeah, maybe obviously he'd be a bit older, but I don't necessarily think it would come out in the way it has. But it's been fantastic. So Seb's been a credit to the sport, a credit to the teams that he's driven for, and I wish him all the best in his retirement. Although, I don't think it will be permanent. But that's something I'll cover at a later date. Okay, time for the final driver ratings of the season. So we'll start with Red Bull, the driver and constructor champion, Max Verstappen. Started first, finished first, drove beautifully, rating of 5. Sergio Perez started second, finished third. Tried that 2-stop strategy, missed out by about a second and a bit, but drove very well again. Rating of 3 for Checo. Charles Leclerc drove excellently to pick up that second place from a third place grid slot. It looked a real uphill task starting from the second row, and especially when the Red Bulls seemed to check out at the front. It looked like second place was all but sewn up for Sergio Perez, but Charles hung in there. He really did, and it's just a shame he wasn't able to hang in the championship fight quite as well as he did in this race. But like I said, this race was pretty much the whole season put into 58 laps. So a 3.5 rating for Charles. Carlos Sainz, a 3 for him. I don't think he left Lewis enough space on the first lap at turn 6, but the way the rules are written at the moment, Lewis was going to get a penalty if he didn't hand the place back, but I feel that Carlos didn't do enough to leave Lewis space, especially on the first lap. We know that they take a slightly lighter touch to, well, they used to at least, take a slightly lighter touch to incidents on the first lap, and I think, barring someone deliberately cutting a corner to gain positions, Fernando Alonso Sochi style, then, they should let maybe the first lap slide a little bit. But then, obviously sometimes the first lap is the best chance to make positions. So a rating of 3 for Carlos. And for Lewis Hamilton, who started 5th, he didn't finish the race. He'll be so glad to see the back of this W13, the first car that he's driven that hasn't been able to give him a victory. A rating of 2.5, he did his best. He had some issues in the first stint, and I think they were the the beginnings of the hydraulic problem that he failed to finish with in the end, having gone over that curb that bounced him in the air. I don't know why that's there. What on earth is it doing there? Drivers are going to have to escape across there. You don't want people bouncing up in the air. That was, not sensible thinking from the circuit designers. But Lewis at 2.5. George Russell drove well, had decent pace at times. A rating of 3. Unsafe release, not really his fault. It was a slow stop and then the team released him. I don't think they have the lollipop anymore. I think they just have the automated light system. So I don't think you can beat the lollipop guy, because they've got a set of eyes and a brain, and they can just go, oh no, there's a car coming, we'll hold the car, then we'll let him go when it's safe. But ever the pursuit of quicker pit stops and saving time. Maybe there should be a mandatory stationary period in the pit stop. So, say 5 seconds. And it means that they can get the wheels and tyres on. And if they're ready, they can, 5 seconds, and they can let the car go at an appropriate time. It doesn't make it all a rush. The guy with the lollipop can position himself, have a look. He's got a second or two to make that decision. If he doesn't lift it, can't go. Maybe a mandatory 5 seconds stop time. Who knows? That would change strategy as well, pretty dramatically, because instead of being at shorter pit lane, you'd have this 5 second stationary time you've always got to factor in. So strategy could be different. Alpine, well, they only had one car finish, as they've regularly done this season, and that one car was Esteban Ocon. Bit anonymous in the race. He just followed Lando Norris around, really, didn't he? 2.5 for the Frenchman, having started 8th and finished 7th. Fernando Alonso started 10th, didn't finish because of a water leak. He goes to Aston Martin now, and he had some salty comments for the Alpine car. He hoped he had a more competitive machine next year. Well, they all do, don't they? So he's not alone in that. Rating of 2 for Fernando. Daniel Ricciardo's final race for McLaren ended with a 9th place and a couple of points, so a rating of 3 for the Australian, who came from 13th on the grid, recovering from his 3-place grid drop. Oh, I've missed out Lando Norris. 7th to 6th for Lando, rating of 3 for him as well. I mean, hardly noticed him, and I've mistakenly jumped over him. Apologies, Lando. Valtteri Bottas, 18th in qualifying. Really poor performance from Bottas, and 15th in the race. The first half of the season was great for Alfa and Valtteri, but the second part of the season has really tailed off. And they've just scraped P6 in the championship. Zhou Guanyu, 15th to 12th, a rating of 2 as well. Pretty anonymous. We didn't see much of the guys in that midfield outside the top 10. We did see Sebastian Vettel quite a lot, a rating of 3 for Seb. 9th to 10th, which was a shame. The strategy wasn't good from Aston Martin, sadly. I think if he'd gone on a 2-stop, he'd have been really racy towards the end. He might have even got enough points for Aston to pick up the P6 in the Constructors. Lance Stroll, 13th to 12th to 8th. Rating of 3. Great drive from Lance. When he's not crashing into people or pushing them on the grass, he's actually a very accomplished racing driver. So, credit where credit's due. Haas, 17th for Magnussen at the end, 16th for Mick Schumacher. Rating of 2 for Haas, a bit of a bump back down to earth after the highs of Brazil's qualifying session. They did beat AlphaTauri in the Constructors. Pierre Gasly 14th before he leaves for Alpine, a rating of 2 for the Frenchman. Yuki Tsunoda started and finished 11th, so a decent drive from Yuki. I'm going to give him a 2.5 because he's not been a standout performer really this season. He's had a couple of decent results, but he's really struggled. I know the car hasn't been very good, but he's not even been beating Gasly. So I think he's going to get a little bit shown up by Nick de Vries coming in and outperforming him next year. And that would spell the end for Yuki Tsunoda, which would be a shame. But Japan have got Ayumu Iwasa in Formula 2, who's doing brilliantly. And if he has a good F2 season next year, maybe he goes into the AlphaTauri. Wait and see. And let's finish up with Williams. Alex Albon, 19th to 13th. Good drive from Alex Albon. And I'm going to give him a 2.5. Latifi on his final outing for Williams, 20th to 19th. Not really much left to say about Latifi. And so to finish off the show, let's rate the race. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. There was some excitement. It wasn't hugely exciting. I never felt really captivated by the race. Not like last week in Sao Paulo and other races. It was just one of those where you were hoping for a safety car at the right time to kind of throw everything up in the air and take the cars in position, out of position, and but we never got that, sadly. Although I'm not sure safety cars at Abu Dhabi really are the way forward. It might just trigger a few bad memories for some people. I actually forgot to ask for race ratings from the guys at Grid Talk, but here's what a few of them had to say in one of our chats afterwards. So I hope they don't mind me quoting them on my show. So Louis Edwards, one of the podcast hosts there, he said the race was more interesting than usual. Tom Horrocks, the host of the Monkey Seat podcast with Carl King, said he had hoped for more with the new 2022 cars. To be fair though, it wasn't hard to pass. There was just too many cars where they should be. So a lot of the overtaking we saw was the front runners coming back through after their pit stops. And we did see the occasional change for bona fide position in the midfield, but they were few and far between. And Everything F1's Tom Downey said the DRS activation point on the back straight should be moved a bit further down. I'm not sure whether he means the first one or the second one. I'm assuming he means the second straight, but that's for Tom to explain. And of course, you can leave your race rating in the comments down below. The checkered flag is now waving on another show. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find my written work at f1chronicle.com and insidef2.com. We'll be covering the F2 postseason test this week in Abu Dhabi on Inside F2. So keep your eyes peeled on that for the latest news from the world of Formula 2. You can find more on this channel. So short videos, breaking news, general opinion, you know what it's coming to. And if you like what I do, leave a review. If I rock the mic, give the show a like, please. Stay tuned for more F1 content coming from this channel over the winter months. I'm hoping to get some more guests involved on the show. I've had a few over the season. It's not always easy to get it all sorted out with people's timings and my own timings. I tend to record on a Monday. Everyone else is usually at work on a Monday, so it's not so easy. I'm going to try and do some more F1 manager streams, so we've got no F1 on the weekend, so maybe we'll use that time appropriately. So subscribe to your favourite podcast player and on YouTube so you know what is coming and when. For now though, I'll see you when the 5 red lights go out.